Hello everyone. This video is a compilation from the LIFE platform meeting, Lessons from LIFE on Ecological Connectivity Towards a Coherent and Resilient Trans-European Nature Network. A mapping exercise of the LIFE project database revealed that almost 150 LIFE projects have relevant practical experience to share on connectivity measures. LIFE platform meetings are intended to share experiences and to facilitate networking between LIFE practitioners while also formulating key messages for policy and decision makers. Landscape fragmentation is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss. These threats are currently exacerbated by the increasingly noticeable effect of climate change on ecosystems. This highlights the importance of connectivity as a necessary tool for ensuring biodiversity conservation and the delivery of the ecosystem services in the long term. One of the important targets within the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 is to ensure a coherent, functional and resilient trans-European network of ecological corridors and areas of high biodiversity value, while also setting the basis for an ambitious EU-wide restoration plan. This platform meeting focuses specifically on the importance of creating a network of ecological corridors and was structured according to the following narrative: how to best identify priority corridor areas, how to best govern these ecological corridors, and how to ensure funding for connectivity conservation. Enjoy the video.
Ecological connectivity is vital for species conservation and maintaining ecological processes in a world that's facing unprecedented levels of fragmentation and the impacts of climate change. While protected areas have grown substantially in response to the biodiversity crisis, connectivity between protected areas has not. And Santiago Soro and his team at the Joint Commission for European Union, it's around 11% of protected areas around the world are connected sufficiently. And if you were just to map all the terrestrial protected areas in the world on a blue background, 30 by 30 or 30% of the world protected by 2030 may grow these polygons, but they won't connect them. And we need a concerted effort to connect them because well-connected protected areas are more effective protected areas. One of the key elements in the guidelines is essentially laying out that our common term is ecological corridor, a clearly defined geographical space that is governed and managed over the long term to maintain and restore effective ecological connectivity. And here's the key point. Protected areas and OECMs, or conserved areas, are protected to conserve biodiversity. Ecological corridors, because they are not protected areas, conserve a connectivity value that's defined by the nation or user in how they define what connectivity value they want to conserve. It may not protect all of biodiversity. Its focus is clearly on the connective value. And that is the key. Ecological corridors are critical for ecological networks for conservation. It's a system of core habitats, protected areas, and such, that if not already connected by protected areas, because protected areas themselves can have connectivity properties, but they're connected by corridors outside of protected areas to conserve biological diversities and systems that are been fragmented.
Everybody has a view on connectivity. Everybody has a different view on connectivity. And this is because connectivity is a very wide term. It's a bit of a catch-all term that has been used for all kinds of purposes. And the danger with these terms is that we are getting confused. I think there is three main issues that are largely covered by the understanding of connectivity. And I think the first one is the most simple one. When you talk about species that need to complete their life cycle. And I just take as an example a migratory fish, the Atlantic salmon. When it cannot complete its life cycle because there is a barrier, we have clearly a connectivity issue that needs to be solved very urgently. I think this is very easy to understand, and we have a lot of examples of barriers that need to be removed to ensure that species can complete their life cycle. I think that's really quite easy to understand for everybody. But then when we talk about connectivity, most people actually think about the question of is a network of protected areas or is a network of natural areas sufficiently robust and well connected to ensure that there is no extinction and that there is also recolonization in case of let's say a natural extinction event or a restoration, so that the network as such is sufficiently robust and can in the long term maintain the biodiversity which it's supposed to contain. There is a kind of hierarchy of what needs to be done, which says we need to better manage, we need to have more, we need to have it better connected, and perhaps we need additional sites. So that's the point here. And so keep in mind that enhancing connectivity is just one of the issues that we need to tackle, and it cannot replace the others. It's part of a bigger package of measures that we need. And then when we look at the debates on connectivity, there is a third issue that will become increasingly important. We know that climate change is knocking on the doors. We can already see it to some extent. Some species are moving their ranges northwards. We have range shifts that are either occurring already or that have to be anticipated. And connectivity also means that in the long term, we need to plan for these range shifts and we need to allow species to move northwards. So this is also an important point, and I know that some projects have already thinking very intensively on this. The point I wanted to do here with this arrow is that the more you go towards that, the more difficult it is to decide what is actually needed. And we need the science to become involved in this.
The first day of the platform meeting focused on how to best identify priority connectivity areas to achieve a coherent and functional trans-European nature network. In working group sessions, live projects were presented, followed by a rich debate, sharing experiences among practitioners and coming up also with policy recommendations. The first working group focused on defining clear objectives and selection criteria most commonly used by practitioners to identify and prioritize ecological corridors, to ensure landscape multifunctionality, including the delivery of connectivity goals, nature conservation, and multiple ecosystem services in the context of climate change. A second group focused specifically on connectivity across agricultural areas. These areas play a key role in restoring and maintaining ecological connectivity between core biodiversity areas, and several LIFE projects have taken on a more landscape-wide approach to conservation and restoration by closely working with farmers. Finally, a third, more technical group wanted to get more practical insight into concrete applications of existing mapping models and decision-making tools for connectivity planning.
If you look at governance, then you realize that governance is about process, and management is more about substance or operations. Process. Why process? Because it matters who decides what the objectives are, who sets the stage, how to organize a stakeholder consultation process, how to bring stakeholders to the table, who actually holds power, authority, and responsibility for making decisions. And of course, since it's a multi-stakeholder process by default, and also how differences are being reconciled, and actually how certain decisions are being taken. Look at the IUCN governance type, you will see that boils down to 4 governance types. and breaks down to governance by government, when government is a sole responsible body for making decisions at different levels. I mean, can be national to local. That there are shared governance arrangements which include transboundary governance, but is also collaborative or joint governance when you have different bodies that are part of decision-making process. It can be also state or non-state actors. You have private governance that lead often to privately protected areas. We have either individuals or non-government organizations or corporate sector who is responsible for making decisions. And then, of course, you have a wealth of indigenous peoples governed land and territories.
The goal of this Life Integrated project is to develop the PAF, and one of its strategies is to ensure the ecological connection among the Nature 2000 sites in order to favor the coherence of network. First of all, the goal was to strengthen connectivity through the consolidation of functional habitats to target animal species, where in plain and foothills areas of Lombardy region, where intense anthropogenic pressures is strongly present due to agricultural, urbanization, infrastructures, as you can see from the images on the left. The local referent contacts land owners of the areas potentially interested by intervention. They verify and agree where and how to realize the intervention according to the API data sheet. An agreement about roles is defined. The local referent realizes, takes care, and supervises the intervention. The landowner accepts not to modify the areas for 15 years. Regione Lombardia advertised the action, underlining the owner's environmental commitment. This is nice for farmhouses, what want to propose touristic activities. After the agreement is signed, a definitive project is paid with Life Fund from Gestire 2020, and it is delivered to the management referent who realized the intervention. Life IP Gestire 2020 identified priority areas as a tool to increase ecological connectivity. Two approaches were applied. Area has ever been identified with a top-down approach because we needed to maintain a vision of the overall regional conservation strategy. Instead, the governance process for the area is totally bottom-up. No obligations are enforced by law, and the agreements are fully voluntary.
During the second day of the LIFE platform meeting, we looked into successful examples of governance models and land tenure schemes from LIFE project that ensure appropriate long-term management and conservation of ecological corridors. A total of 4 working groups looked into different aspects while sharing again experiences from the field, based on which recommendations were formulated. Group 1 discussed what are the successful governance elements for long-term management of ecological corridors. Group 2 zoomed in on successful transboundary governance arrangement for connectivity conservation, while Group 3 discussed more the participatory approaches and stakeholder engagement in ecological corridors. And finally, Group 4 looked into how to ensure effective long-term connectivity conservation in other effective area-based conservation measures, OECMs in short, and other non-legally protected areas, and how this can actually work in practice. Currently, 28%, almost 1/3, of EU landscape is strongly fragmented, and this is due to infrastructure, urbanization, and agriculture, meaning that ecological processes are disrupted and that there's no free, dispersal, and movement possible for animal and plant species. So, at the moment, the EU Natura 2000 network covers 18% of EU land and 10% of EU seas. But unfortunately, many of these protected sites are often not connected. Under the recently released EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, which is a core component of the EU Green Deal, the aim is to further expand legally protected areas in Europe to at least 30% of its land and 30% of sea areas. The strategy also aims to integrate ecological corridors as part of a coherent, functional, and resilient trans-European nature network. Only in the last 12 years, LIFE has supported at least 150 projects to help create ecological corridors, and there's another 25 LIFE projects that help to remove barriers along waterways and restore rivers in a free-flowing state. Let's take you on a short connectivity conservation journey across different EU member states to show what LIFE Connects looks like in the field, including also some other relevant non-LIFE projects. The first series of projects focuses on the creation of ecological corridors for animal species. The LIFE Wolflux project in Portugal focuses on removing not just geographic but also social barriers for the Iberian wolf population. The WWF project Open Borders for Wildlife in the Carpathians takes instead a multi-species approach. It focuses on transboundary corridors for brown bears, wolves, as well as Eurasian lynx. In Slovenia, the LIFE Links project identifies priority ecological corridors between large forested areas for both large carnivores as well as ungulate species. The LIFE Safe Crossings project aims to prevent animal-vehicle collisions in southeastern Europe by installing crossing structures, raising awareness of drivers, and putting up alert systems along the roads. Moving to the Azores, in the middle of the Atlantic, the project Live Beetles makes a strong case for a critically endangered and endemic beetle through nature-based solutions and by creating favorable green infrastructure as stepping stones within peri-urban areas. Next in line is the Swedish LIFE project Bridge the Gap, that creates decaying wood habitats for saproxylic beetles and other invertebrates to tackle increasing habitat fragmentation. In Slovakia, the LIFE Microtus 2 focuses on the restoration of wetlands, marshlands, and wet meadows, while also creating ecological corridors and stepping stones to reconnect existing root vole populations. Other projects take a more integrated approach to improve connectivity across wider landscapes or habitats. The Swedish LIFE project Goodstream combines barrier removal, habitat restoration, and wetland construction to reach a good ecological status of a stream, along with ensuring increased connectivity across the agriculture landscape. In Spain, the LIFE Aunus project focuses on restoration of Mediterranean alluvial forest to reverse habitat fragmentation while using systematic planning models to identify priority corridors to restore both ecological connectivity and integrity. Other projects have found a way to turn connectivity challenges into opportunities. The Polish LIFE project, Trees for Europe's Green Infrastructure, aims to improve the management of trees along roads, streets, and dikes in rural and urban areas. While for some species roads can be barriers, for others they function as corridors. The Belgian ELIA project, on the other hand, transformed a power line network into a green network and developed best practices for vegetation management of transport infrastructure. Their approach was adopted in Belgium and France, and in Slovakia and Portugal are keen to join in the new follow-up LIFE project Grid for Life, to combine electrical connectivity with ecological connectivity. Also in Belgium, the Life in Quarries project demonstrates that cohabitation of nature and business is possible even in the extractive industry. The creation of both temporary and permanent nature in a network of active quarries functions as stepping stones for multiple species across a fragmented landscape. Many connectivity projects work with mapping and GIS models or decision-making tools to identify where priority areas for ecological corridors are. The Portuguese Lifelines project is one of them. Based on dynamic connectivity GIS models and remote sensing, they generate multi-species connectivity maps, which are then validated with roadkill data. This allows defining priority area for restoration and wider landscape planning. Also, the IUCN Great Mountain Corridor project takes a large-scale view and uses GIS and spatial analysis to reconnect the Alps, Massif Central, Pyrenees and Cantabrian mountains through international cooperation. WWF Spain identified a country-wide connectivity network between its Natura 2000 sites with a focus on forest ecosystems. The study and mapping resulted in 12 main ecological corridors across the whole of Spain. Live Green Go Carpathians focuses on local initiatives for the deployment of green infrastructure within Natura 2000 sites. This project also includes a strong component of spatial planning in combination with land and green infrastructure management. Some LIFE projects focus on getting private landowners on board for connectivity conservation. The European-wide Land is Forever LIFE project aims to create a menu of tools for private landowners regarding incentives and compensations, while also looking into different management schemes. The recently started European Network for Private Land Conservation will further build on this experience. The LIFE Brenta 2030 project in Italy trials an innovative financing scheme for both biodiversity and water conservation. The Brenta River is an important source of drinking water. The user pays for clean water, which then provides compensation funds for land management measures through the water bill. In Spain, the LIFE Olivares Vivos project works towards the design and certification of biodiversity-friendly olive groves, a key agro-ecosystem in Europe. LIFE Egypt in Greece wants to reconnect nature with agricultural areas and also support sustainable farming methods in pilot olive orchards. In Malta, the LIFE Green Change project wants to enhance the ecological value of agro-ecosystems and supports governance tools based on the assessment of ecosystem services. The Latvian Grass Life project developed a grassland connectivity model and comes up with recommendations for priority grassland restoration while collaborating with farms. Finally, there are also projects that combine conservation connectivity with climate change mitigation. LIFE Forest CO2 works with private forest owners adopting sustainable forest management practices to generate carbon credits that are then sold to companies who want to compensate or offset their carbon footprint. Also in Spain, the LIFE Wetlands for Climate focuses on conservation and restoration of wetlands, as these functions as both important carbon sinks and connectivity ecosystems. To conclude our journey across a hopefully increasingly connected Europe, we want to show a short video clip that shows the combined effort of 3 consecutive Spanish LIFE projects. These managed to restore connectivity of the Cantabrian brown bear population through 4 main corridors. By planting cherry and chestnut trees, following intensive consultation and collaboration with all stakeholders, while addressing conflicts, setting up land stewardship agreements, and also creating jobs. On day 3, we focus on how to actually ensure funding for connectivity conservation. Based on feedback from member states, it is estimated that €12.5 billion is needed for all EU member states each year to implement the priority action frameworks for the period 2021-2027. Out of this, €2.4 billion is dedicated for measures outside Natura 2000 sites, which includes green infrastructure and connectivity conservation action. We invited experts from different Directorate General from the European Commission to tell us more about upcoming European funding instruments and what they can do for connectivity conservation. Other speakers elaborated more on opportunities of private and blending funding mechanisms. And again here, LIFE and other projects, mainly from Spain, shared their experience in securing connectivity funding.
A lot of the support that LIFE has provided has been centered on Natura 2000 and connectivity in support of the network. This is not surprising because we can say that Natura 2000 is really the heart of biodiversity in Europe. How connectivity can be still addressed in the future? I think a lot will be similar to what has happened already in the past, with a clear entry point when it comes to the sub-program on nature biodiversity. And this building on the existing policy and legislation, starting with the Habitats Birds Directive, and therefore the support, strong support to Natura 2000 network, but also invasive alien species regulation, pollinator strategies, and of course the new biodiversity strategy for 2030. Still, there will be, even though maybe in an indirect way, opportunities under the sub-programs dedicated to circular economy and quality of life, as well as climate mitigation and adaptation through different measures such as green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, action targeting water or forest. This is just to give in broad terms some examples.
I would like to highlight that with this new part, we are really supporting the new EU biodiversity strategy. We will be trying to help to monitoring all the targets, including the build of a coherent trans-European network that it will include the corridor. So to restore the integrity of the terrestrial, aquatic, and marine ecosystem. And also we are developing a long-term biodiversity research agenda that will include and we will try to capture all the knowledge gaps and needs to be covered in the next 7 years. In Horizon Europe, there is another cluster working on climate that also will help to understand the interaction between climate change and ecosystem and how the ecosystem are impacted by climate change, so how the animals are going to need to move. So this also can be framed in these other areas. So I have talked one part of Horizon Europe, but Horizon Europe have also in place a new instrument that are the European Partnership. The European Partnership are co-funded actions between member states and the European Commission. The European Partnership, as I said, this one that is already in place, and the strategic research agenda has been published in public consultation. We'll have for working areas, one of the working areas will be focused on the knowledge and data needed to understand which is the biodiversity status, and this will be developed like joint calls where the member states will decide whether it's need or not. It will have also a second part in this working area that is related to monitoring. It's a big component that will try to harmonize the data, the methodology, will test new methods to do monitoring, new technologies, involve the citizens. So it will be an investment of more than 100 million on monitoring. So this is a really big component.
I will, of course, focus on the parts which are interesting for us. And that starts here with the 9 specific objectives that we have in the CAP, for which the objective 9, to contribute to the biodiversity and hence the ecosystem services and habitats and landscapes, the so-called specific objective 6, is the most important ones. But as you can see here, it's 1 out of 9. What we have in the new CAP is the new green architecture, which is really built in, and I think this picture very much illustrates that, is built up from different building blocks. It has enhanced conditionality. I will come back to those elements later on. It has then the so-called Pillar 1, the direct payments with the eco-schemes, which have already been mentioned also by my colleague beforehand, and the classical rural development measures, which we know already now, which have not only the agri-environmental measures, but also knowledge transfer, innovation, cooperation, etc. This time in the new green architecture, for the next years to come, the member states will set up plans using both pillars together in one plan. So that already will be a big change, because all the parts of the agricultural policy will be in one plan based on one SWOT analysis and based on a needs assessment. So there is a far bigger link between the CAP and the other environmental and climate legislation. And there are 12 items listed. And of course, the Birds and Habitats Directive plays a very prominent role in that. The competent authorities for environment and climate are to be effectively involved in the CAP plan setting. So this is really the call to all of you, and to pass to your authorities for environment and climate the active role you want to play in the CAP, and they have to play in the CAP plan setting.
I will focus now on the Interreg part, which is really specifically a cooperation framework, let's say. So for cooperation between national, regional, local actors from different member states, and also third countries. And for all this, in the next period, we have just about 8 billion euros. So it is an important financial support mechanism for cooperation across borders. And this includes, as we will see, can include the protection and preservation of nature and biodiversity. We will look in some more detail on this specific objective. And as you see, it can include, for example, then protection and preservation of nature and biodiversity, ecosystem restoration, green infrastructure, and but also other things which are, let's say, less relevant to today's topic. And you see some points where we think there could be added value of the cross-border cooperation type of cooperation to work on joint knowledge development and planning, joint protection of cross-border ecosystems, or joint management of natural sites, and then also EU-level green infrastructure. And here we come, for example, then to ecological corridors when they go across borders.
In the Life Just, we seek to implement innovative forest management strategies to enhance biodiversity in Mediterranean forest, namely in Catalonia and Occitania. In this project, we conducted an analysis of innovative financial mechanisms that could be applied to integrate biodiversity conservation into the sustainable forest management. And some of these mechanisms are already used to a certain extent in Spain, but almost all can be further developed to tackle the financing of forest biodiversity conservation or connectivity conservation.
I participate in this panel to present alternative ways of financing projects that might be of interest for your initiatives in the field of natural connectivity and biodiversity preservation. These are two examples of successful crowdfunding campaigns supported through our platform in the field of natural conservation and connectivity. These are were both implemented in Spain, one in Vizcaya and one in Burgos. And I choose these two examples because they give you an idea of the amount of the different amount of money of that the project can apply for through Goteo. One is in the order of 10,000 euros and the other 40,000 euros.
As Fundación Global Nature, we are strategic partners in the National Initiative for Business and Biodiversity at national level, launched by the Spanish Ministry of Transition of Ecology. So we are working too in natural capital projects with private companies. Our main thematic areas where we work and the main sources of private co-finance that we use. So we work mainly in conservation of habitats, mainly wetlands and species too. We work in the sustainability of the agri-food sector and in corporate sustainability. And the main sources for co-finance in the private part is that we work with voluntary carbon markets. This is a new approach we are opening now. We work too with sustainable agri-food products, and we work with corporate social responsibility. On my next slide, I give you just a small example on wetlands restoration. Is one of our main thematic areas. We have worked in more than 20 projects for the restoration of ecosystems funded by the European Union and mainly by LIFE programs. But of course, we need to the private co-finance and other sources of co-financing. And we have invested almost 19 million euros in more than 14,000 hectares in 110 wetlands in this line.
We own and we manage a network of privately protected area in Catalonia, in our region, which is the largest that we have. And we also use other mechanisms like land stewardship agreements or other conservation agreements especially with local municipalities. But again, let's say the generating income from this is possible thanks to the visitors to our Natura sites. We have approximately more than 400,000 visitors to these areas every year. And thanks to that, we can employ about more than 30 people in the sites, in the natural sites, which are essentially almost all in Natura 2000, and some of them even in other protected areas. In our natural sites, we have 6, not everywhere, but in 6 of our sites, we have visitor centers. And in these visitor centers, we can organize some activities which are under payment, and also some ecotourism activities like photographic hikes, etc. And we also have shops for the visitors, so they can buy especially local agricultural related foods and things like that. And this also generates some income for us.
I'd like to share with you some wrap-up recommendations for policymakers that came out of this platform meeting. But first, I want to share our family photo, and I think it's really important to see that we had 215 people participating in the full 3-day event, another 300 on day 3 on funding. So over 500 participants, which shows that connectivity conservation really matters. We had 80 live projects present from all different life strands, of which 60 had the opportunity to present in one format or another, covering experiences from the field in 16 EU member states, and obviously a much broader audience, including EU representatives, academic, international organizations, government officials, NGOs, and so on. So we came up with 6 priority topics on which some key policy messages were formulated. So the first one was already clear from day one and confirmed in many of the discussions, and that is stakeholder engagement is key to unlock the potential of connectivity conservation. So some messages here is to devote sufficient time and resources for stakeholder engagement and enable shared governance models in settings where there are multiple stakeholders. A second priority was on data sharing, monitoring, and learning. And here, a key message is to encourage open access to spatial data at EU level and to promote the use of EU biogeographical processes or equivalents as a platform for sharing best practices. A third one is on developing the long-term vision for connectivity conservation. So it would be very valuable to define a conceptual framework for connectivity at all levels, be it national, regional, transboundary, as well as international, and to develop a long-term vision or strategy, as well as key objectives and targets for ecological corridors. A fourth priority is strengthening the EU policy framework. So here, it's key to establish incentives for private landowners to involve them in conservation actions. And there's a strong need to establish a framework or even a legal basis for transboundary cooperation, not just on ecological corridors, but also conservation areas at EU level. Target small and low productivity farms in the CAP eco schemes is something that kept coming back in the discussions, and the need to fine-tune EAFRD measures to have practical use for biodiversity conservation. The integration of connectivity into wider land planning and across sectors, another very important priority. And here the messages are to foster active integration of connectivity measures into the spatial planning frameworks. And these are obviously top-down processes, but combine these by involving people who are emotionally, financially, legally invested in the corridor, in the co-management from the beginning, which is then more a bottom-up process. And again, ecological connectivity should be addressed in the upcoming new national CAP strategic plans. And then finally, continuity of funding, as always, an important one. So here, encourage the use of the regional development programs and again, the CAP eco schemes, especially for small-scale farmers, and to evolve the financial support system to include market solutions and the many opportunities in the private sector. Some key messages for the LIFE program is to highlight and prioritize connectivity in the upcoming call for proposals and the 2021-2027 LIFE program, and to monitor all connectivity indicators, not just biodiversity, but also ecosystem services, social and economic indicators to show the impact of the measures taken. And just like we did in this platform event, to ensure that we disseminate this consolidated learning from LIFE practitioners and facilitate exchanges between academics, practitioners, and policymakers. So to conclude, there's a lot of good work and great progress already on identifying priority ecological corridors, on how to best manage them, the governance aspect, and there's clearly a range of funding sources that being used. But what became clear is that one size does not fit all, and it's very context related. So it's important to diversify funding sources, governance models, mapping tools, as well as stakeholder engagement platforms. It's key to embrace innovation, but also to continue to build on already existing good practices. So we hope that connectivity gets its deserved place on the EU conservation and restoration agenda. Thanks for your attention. A lot more information is available in the report, and keep connecting the dots.